My name's Andrew Pritchard. I was arrested for smuggling $130 million worth of cocaine from the Caribbean to Europe, and this is how crime works. It was becoming an everyday occurrence that business associates were getting killed. There has been loads of occasions when you've actually walked into a situation and in the back of your head you're thinking, I might not leave this room. A person who's addicted to drugs is addicted to the drugs. A smuggler is addicted to the lifestyle. And it's almost like a poison in your blood. Music played a massive part in my life. From around 1983 was when I entered into the sound system culture, and I was asked to play at the parties, produce my sound system there. I was playing my own gigs and becoming quite established. It brought a lot of attention from a lot of people. Understanding I was still a very young man at this time, 22 years old, making vast amounts of money, entertaining, thousands and thousands of people every single weekend. The drug economy was becoming massive. Of course, ecstasy. You had a whole network of people that sold and distributed those drugs. So I saw an opportunity because I realised by utilising people I had who were actually bringing in legitimate cargo, legitimate goods, which were coming in every day, mainly perishable goods for quick clearance, and started bringing ecstasy tablets in that way. Because of the easy availability from Holland, where the pills were coming in from, and the size of the parties upscaling, it quickly became a multi-million-pound business. So in 1992, I landed in Jamaica. My mum came from Jamaica in 1951, and I was one of the first mixed race generation post-Windrush kids. Geographically, Jamaica is the most well-positioned island in the Caribbean Sea for smuggling. One period in the early 90s, they estimated over 10% of all the cocaine produced in Colombia was transshipped through Jamaica. I've realised I had access to customs officers and I had access to products. By the turn of the millennium, thanks to a great connection with the Eastern Caribbean cartel, I moved on to cocaine. A member of my extended family, Bible I suppose was my mentor, who'd returned to Jamaica, and basically they'd been a smuggler but had retired, but was at that time involved in the dollar exchange business, which basically US dollars, of course, were in great demand in Jamaica. Because of his contacts in the drug trade meant that people would come to him in order for him to exchange their US dollars, Canadian dollars and pound sterling back into Jamaican dollars. So he was a bridge between the underworld and the business people of Jamaica. Bible let me understand how that business used to work. Years ago, he used to bring literally tons of Colombian gold marijuana from Colombia into the States because there was a huge demand for it. During the 70s, cocaine started to find its way in play. And the people who were involved in the weed smuggling business started to turn more to cocaine. Bible chose not to get involved in it the slightest way, and everything is done on introduction. I remember a few of the sayings he said, and there was one particular one, it was never trust the 3 T's. The 3 T's were never talk on the telephone, because obviously the DEA have unlimited access to tap in phone calls. Never send a text because all messages and interception is basically, covered. And never tell a woman, because what sometimes you can tell someone in the spur of the moment, it can end up actually getting you in a life sentence. But the name which I should say I was part of was the Eastern Caribbean Cartel. And the Eastern Caribbean Cartel sits in a cluster of the Caribbean islands and the coast of South America. Cocaine, you either purchase it from as close to source as possible, in which case, it comes in from one of the islands, or you buy it from corrupt narcos police who are supposed to incinerate it. But labs generally aren't all mega labs. They're smaller labs, that produce a certain amount, 100 a week, 50 a week. It's not as it's made out to be in films like Scarface. What happens is, if you wanted a consignment, say you wanted half a ton, 500 kilos, it'd come together from 3 or 4 people. And those people basically wouldn't even have to go to Colombia. You could purchase straight from Colombia, but obviously you are involved in the process of having to pay FARC, who make sure it gets safely down the waterways. You know, you've got a whole process of crossing it across again over the border to Venezuela to the jump-off point. Back then, you could buy what they call paste, which is in Colombia, it's the rawest form of cocaine, at approximately $600 a kilo. And then from the case, it goes through a process of different chemicals, and then you get it where ether's applied to the raw product, and you're probably getting cocaine back then for around $900 a kilo. And then obviously you pay for the transportation as it crosses various borders. I would never, ever cross to Colombia, because instantly you're blown up on the DEA watch list. So I would travel to Guyana, I would travel to Venezuela. Reluctantly, where I would tend to go would be Tobago, because Tobago obviously sits right beside those islands, but it potentially wasn't on the DEA watch list as much as the others two were. They're red flag countries, you know, even though Trinidad now is one of the most red flag countries there is. So most of the shipments either come by vessel or they come by plane. So generally speaking, ships take between 12 and 14 days to Holland or wherever you want to go to in Europe. Depends on what rate of fuel they burn. It'll come in what we call dry containers or refrigerated containers. One thing people fail to realise is that the easiest way to smuggle drugs or any form of contraband is simply by running along the same side as a route that runs every single day, which is a normal, produce or product. Perishable goods, fruit and veg, are a key product to import. If they're left too long hanging around, they're going to go rotten. So these goods are usually cleared very, very quickly. In UK customs, we have a series of what they call routes. So for an example, there's route 1, which is all documentation to be checked, and that could maybe take 24 hours for a cargo to be cleared. You've got route 2, which is a physical inspection, which means all the goods have to be unpacked. But with companies that have been running for a long period of time, they fall under something called route 6, which is instant clearance. So unless someone phones up the cops and says there's definitely drugs on there, that shipment will literally be cleared straight through customs, no questions asked. For a great number of years, Spitalfields and Covent Garden Market imported fruit and veg from virtually every producing country in the world. Making contact with them, as long as I could guarantee that when products were coming in for the people who they worked for, I could definitely get it off at this end without the actual owner of the company being any the wiser. So that was a system we started to use. I remember there was a very popular hot sauce brand, and they used to come in boxes like that of usually 12 or 24 crated, and then they would go into brown cardboard boxes. But we had a wholesaler in Holland with weed who literally used to take 20-foot containers full of them. And of course we had syrup, and ironically we had a really bad turnout one day because we had a container loaded. It was about, I think it was close to maybe 4.5 metric tons of weed in it, and it never rains in Jamaica. On this particular day when the container was being moved to be shipped, it rained, and it rained really, really heavily, and one of the guys who was working on the docks decided he was going to pick up that container and move it, put his foot down, broke into a skid. Of course, the container was up there on this raft. It then fell, and it was like the gates of hell. As it hit the unforgiving concrete floor, all dropped out was tons upon tons of these packages of weed. It looked like a sea of blood, basically. The red syrup in with the rain. It was literally looked like a horror film. The cocaine, the reason why it gets through is because there aren't enough customs officers or border force in the world to check every single piece of cargo. I remember years ago, we used to build false walls at the back of the containers, 1.5 foot from the back wall. We'd build this false wall, we'd get some pot rivets, we'd put them in vinegar to make them go rusty, and we'd basically put them back in and fill the back of the container with weed or cocaine, whatever was necessarily needed. It meant that by the time to get in there, they'd have to obviously unload all the cargo from it. But of course, then came the measurable pen where they could just stick it in there and go, bang, that's 20 foot. You're missing 2 foot at the back of that wall. That was a very simple, frame of technology that changed it. And then of course the refrigerator container, you realise there's a fridge at the back of it, and when you remove that and look inside the fridge, it's like a huge circle, a hole. That gets filled with product. There's been occasion where sometimes things go wrong. I remember one incident where someone had done plantains, you know, and what had happened was the planters had come through, and a woman, she went and bought a box. She went in the back of her car and was feeling them, and they were tough. She went back to the stall holder and she's gone, "These are rubbish, I want my money back." And he's, "What are you talking about?" And he's feeling it and thinking, well, and he's hit it against the desk, and it's just covered in white powder, like a snowman, right? It's like, you know, full of cocaine. A week later, a guy, he's turned up, he's got a brand spanking new Mercedes van. And they're like, "What?" And he's saying like he wants to buy like a pallet, right? And it's like he buys like 2 boxes at a time. So obviously what happened was he's bought a few boxes full of cocaine and he's hit the jackpot, and he's thinking, "I'm going to keep doing it." And that used to happen a lot. So people randomly would end up buying their produce for their shop, going back to their business, and then lifting a lid and it's full of drugs. Moving into the world of serious organised crime is when you then move into actually paying the people who are supposed to be policing this stuff, which are the Customs and Border Force. So from country of origin, in Jamaica, you would have to pay, obviously, the customs in that country, okay? Say $400,000 for a container full of cocaine to leave that country of origin. And that would entail paying the broker who would do the paperwork, the customs officers who would be handling the clearance of the container, he would maybe involve the dog handler, and those would be your team abroad. Shipping, full stop, is international business. However, every container that leaves, the first thing it does from its country of origin is allocated a number. So if they're given that number, they can put an instant flag on it because it's going to be inspected here. When they then put it for inspection, it means they're going to x-ray it. Now a human can override it, but they will identify it to go for x-ray. And then the route goes from them to the x-ray team. X-ray team again, they're paid and they're brought into the system. They then do their paper clearance to say it's been x-rayed, which allows a release to go on the container. He then sends the transport company to collect the container. The container's then delivered and then driven during the night usually, because obviously the time that the market opens, if it's in the market, down to the market. And when it's taken to the market, then it's broken down and taken where it has to be taken to a safe house or a slaughter as we call it, and then during the process of time it's distributed. The thing about drugs, particularly cocaine, the UK, it's a massive marketplace, and when you import it in volumes, you never really come in contact with the people who are actually on the street or on the front line. So a shipment of 1/2 ton would probably go to 3 people, and you know, that'd be broken up in 200 keys, 200 keys and 200 keys. Then they would then distribute it, they'd break it down to make 30 keys or 50 keys. Then those 50 keys goes down to 5 keys, and those 5 keys then go down to single keys, and those single keys go down to, you know, 4 9-bars, and then 4 9-ounce bars then go down to ounces, and those ounces then go down to single ounces, those ounces then turn into grams. But the system with narco economy runs in different ways and different spaces. One of the spaces is the social dealer, and I feel very responsible for the birth of the social dealer. It started with ecstasy. During that period, the second summer of love, people thought it was acceptable to go and get a few pills for their friends. They'll start getting 100 pills, sell them in a week, and then suddenly they lose their jobs, suddenly they're paying their car payments and their mortgage or their rent with the money from drugs. Then they're a Class A drugs dealer. And that was the birth of the social drug dealer, which then turned into cocaine. Getting money back and forth was always, you know, something which is the lifeblood of the business. Things are different now because people use cryptocurrency, but back then it was always cash. And the methods usually used were pretty much, you know, seen in plain sight. One of them I used to use all the time, we had a guy who had a very large business, basically used to import lorries. We used to firstly buy lorries for him here, in which case we'd put them on the ship and then he'd pay for the vehicle when it got to that end. We'd pay our people, but also we used to actually open parts of the vehicle, load it with money, basically, and then weld it back. When that money got back to the island, Jamaica, it's sold on the black market. So basically, money, the more you make, the bigger things you find to invest in. So when you start this kind of business, what you find yourself is the glitzy stuff, we call it, okay? The shiny stuff. It's about the jewellery, it's about the watches, it's about the cars. It's about stuff you want to say you've got a status. But then when you move from there, you kind of go up that ladder a little bit and you think you suddenly want to start to invest. You look for restaurants, you look for things that you think are quite glamorous, nightclubs. And these things are like bottomless pits. They hemorrhage money if you're not on top of them. However, the reality is this, when it all goes wrong, everything goes because it's all traceable. I had lots of different investments. I invested across real estate, I invested across property developments, and I wasted a lot of money on, opportunities or business investments, couldn't even sustain themselves. The drug business, full stop, became more and more and more violent, particularly cocaine. People I've done business with, I've seen been killed in the most horrendous ways. Barbara introduced me to a guy called Blacker Dooch, and Blacker was what they call a don for an area in downtown Kingston. He had leverage at the docks, at the airports. He was assassinated, him and two other guys, in broad daylight. 3 guys drove down into a constituency, which was controlled by another guy who was described as a don, Willie Huggett. They were there at a corner, car drove up, which they thought was plainclothes police, because plainclothes police in Jamaica wear white shirts and generally drive Toyota Corolla vehicles. And they literally just got out with AK-47s and shot all 3 of them to pieces. Another guy I used to work with, he was shot in the head, put into the back of a burning car. Another guy I knew, a guy walked into a restaurant where he was, and 2 other people in a crash helmet, and started firing. He got a bullet in the neck. These were just a few incidents. When you're in this business, you're in it, and you can't see the wood beyond the trees. So what comes with it is all this stuff. A lot of people who are involved in the smuggling business in Jamaica didn't want to get involved in the cocaine industry because they saw firsthand what it done to people. However, there were people who had no consideration for it, and that introduced a ruthless element, and with it came bloodshed. And when you talk about people, who are dangerous guys, there's a saying in Jamaica, there's guys in Jamaica that could scare paint off a building. So there's people out there that don't fear anyone or anything, and they couldn't count how many people they've killed, because one famous saying was, if you've got an Uzi and you're firing down an alleyway, you're not counting. Purity differs because things change, and even from the labs sometimes it isn't pure, and people get it from there. And around Peru and these regions sometimes better quality is coming from there. It's really strange because I've never sold a product I haven't taken, hence I've never sold heroin. I've taken cocaine, I've taken ecstasy, I've smoked marijuana. But one ironic thing is, when I've actually been involved in smuggling them, I haven't wanted to use them. Quality is the most important thing, like anything with drugs. If you buy something cheap, it's not going to last and it's difficult to sell. My strategy that I took on board was stack them high and sell them cheap. So I'd buy the best, but buy lots of it and sell it cheap. People talk about, pink Peruvian champagne and all these other stuff. What people fail to realise is the reason why these forms of cocaine are pink or an off colour is because they're unable to get the chemicals. They'll use substitute chemicals for it. The easiest way of telling good cocaine is oil. So you just put it in your thumbs and let it dissolve. If it's good, you should be able to, sight and smell should straight away let you know the quality. I used various methods of transport for smuggling. A lot in the early days was done by plane, baggage handlers, things like that. And of course, you could always do big consignments in the cargo areas. However, most of the big stuff was really done by containers because these were hugely profitable. If it's coming through the airport, it's coming in smaller quantities. However, you've still got to pay a series of people. You have to have a check-in assistant who's going to be able to log it on there. You have to obviously have the dog handler who's going to obviously let that go through. And then depending where you're then going on from that point, if it's going to be an X-ray and they turn a blind eye to the X-ray, they've got to be paid. Me and my business partner were out in Jamaica and we stayed at the Wyndham Hotel. But during that period of time, the English cricket team were actually touring the West Indies to play. They were there sitting by the pool with us and we were watching every single day these big flight cases with the cricket bats coming in and out. And we're sitting there thinking, those flight cases are not going to be checked. So what we'd done is we'd teed it up with one of the guys who was at the hotel that we'd be able to access those flight cases and pack them with cocaine. The only problem we then had was Jamaica wasn't the last test. So not being one to give up easily, I thought there's got to be another system. And one of the guys that came out there to meet us, he happened to mention that there are certain things that couldn't be x-rayed and one of them was computer screens. And we thought, hold on, if they can't be x-rayed, you can probably put anything in them you want. And of course, what we had was a really good contact in Venezuela who actually was involved in computer parts. And over a period of 6 months, we just gradually became a steady importer of computer screens for Venezuela. Of course, this helped us considerably with cash flow for events and all the other stuff we were doing. Within the computer screens, we had created a balloon which was packed with cocaine. Some of the ones we'd used over the years were suitcases, and one in particular one was the body, which we called the stiff. I'd noticed that someone had actually tried to send a body with a coffin full with drugs in it, but they failed because it was randomly opened at the airport. Of course, that problem wasn't going to have because we had our people who worked at the airport. In Jamaica, it was quite easy to get access to people, like, you know, who knows someone. So getting a doctor was real simple. The biggest thing was obviously being able to get the authorisation to ship a body. So, for example, you knew a guy who was a drug addict or was an alcoholic, he'd sell you his passport for 500 quid. So the picture just could be simply cut, lifted, put whatever picture you want in it, and went into the Jamaican High Commission to tell him he'd died. The doctor we paid him a few $100s. He issued a death certificate, of course, you know, no sight of body, no body existed. Took the death certificate up to the High Commission with the passport and subsequently got access to ship the body over. And of course, once we had the shipping arrangements put in place, we had a local undertakers who reverently retrieved the body from the aeroplane. And that was one incident. I had a great love for Afro-Caribbean music, dominantly reggae and soul. And I set up a sound system with a couple of friends from my road. What was the turning point was the winter of 1988. We came across a huge warehouse, paid the guy would been the equivalent of maybe $800 a night for the venue, and started to stage parties. By New Year's Eve, the events were being flooded by celebrities, people like Boy George, Minnie Vanilli, top-ranking artists were turning up to party and enjoy themselves. And that was a massive launch pad for a company I'd put together called Genesis. When you're putting on parties of that scale, you tend to meet a lot of people and you seem to climb a pecking order in Britain's underworld. Nightlife and gangsters go together. When the parties seemed to be coming to an end under pressure from police raids, the drug economy was becoming massive. Ecstasy was a drug which in Holland it was legal until 1988. It was illegal here earlier under the Misuse of Drug Act, but people were still relatively flexible about the drug. In Britain, tablets would sell up to £25, you know, a single pill, and they could be wholesale for up to £20. And that time they were being bought in Holland for around about £12 or £13. But as demand came more and more and more and more people took them, the price started to drop. Eventually, I could buy pills in Holland for £3 a tablet, and I could get them here and actually wholesale them anywhere between £6 and £8 a tablet by the thousand. So there were huge profit margins, and every 10,000 you're making £30,000 or $50,000. Things were you know, going like clockwork, but like all the best laid plans, eventually something will go wrong. One morning I received a phone call. Someone said to me, you know, there's a serious incident at what I call a safe house. They said basically the police were all over it. So in January 1992, via a false passport, I was on the run and I landed in Jamaica. The idea of going to Jamaica was for me to keep low. Unfortunately, I didn't know what the word low profile meant. I was introduced to a circuit of people of quite high society Jamaican, and I met a young lady whose father was a prominent Jamaican politician. She fell pregnant, and during this time, while I was seeing her and she fell pregnant, I also met another young lady who instantly took my breath away, Miss Jamaica World. I also ended up having a child with her, which I have two beautiful sons as a result of. But of course, I put myself from a low profile character into the front page of Jamaican news. So imagine it, I'm 25 years old and I'm trying my hardest to go straight. Me being me, the marriage fell apart and, you know, I found myself on a road to chaos. I got myself into a fight, ended up in a Jamaican prison, and as luck would have it, have family that could help influence situations and managed to bribe my way out of there. Around about 1997, I finally put the dots together. I was around my friends again, people I'd grown up with. A lot of those guys had now climbed the criminal ladder. Naturally, Jamaica was a producing country where cannabis grows. So Bible, my mentor, he had an amazing list of contacts and they trusted him because he was a very superior figure. He was able to at least give me the protection that I needed. Bible introduced me to a guy called Pritchard. He showed me how the mechanics worked of the business. You know, we'd take drives down to the country, which would be like St. Elizabeth, where weed is grown, and farmers then would come with their harvest of weed. The stuff would be taken, it would be bagged, it would be obviously weighed and then paid for. Then makeshift camps would be set up out in what we call the bush. So we used to be out there and people basically would set up two pieces of railroad track, which would create a press in the middle of it. Special metal plates were made and big tarpaulins were put on the floor. Women would take sharp little knives, manicure the weed, taking out the seeds, separating the seeds from the buds. They were all then put into these presses, these blocks, and then compressed down. Then they were wrapped with various sheets of you know, cellophane, and then we put what we call dog repellent on them, which is made of leaves of different trees. And then the weed was then transported down into central Kingston, where it would be leaving from. It was a very, very profitable business. So on average, you could purchase the best marijuana for around $70 a kilo. Once it gets back to England, the same weed would fetch anywhere up to $3,000 a pound. So the profit margins were huge, even larger if you look on the scale of it than cocaine. Getting the product in consignments down from the country into central Kingston where it's going to ship from, that would usually be done on a cane rafter. Police did stop it randomly. They're certainly not going to unload the sugar cane. Sometimes with ambulances, so we'd obviously pay an ambulance driver and he would basically put it on. He'd basically blue light it all the way down. Even police were used to drive it down. You know, it was a very smuggler friendly place when I lived there. One thing about making money is great, but doing something that you are passionate about doing was really important to me. And having grown up in a sound system culture, and I'd done warehouse parties, but one thing I hadn't done major concerts or festivals. And the jewel in the crown for any reggae enthusiast was Reggae Sunsplash, that I just might be able to achieve bringing it back to the UK. So in 1999, we put on one of the most amazing events ever seen. But again, unfortunately, being the person I am and the business we were running had a lot of attention drawn to it. In particular, people who were coming to visit us at the office. Some of these people were on the police radar. There was one particular individual who was having stolen cars, taking them apart and exporting them. And he used to have some beautiful cars he'd bring by to the office on occasion. And ironically, Wycliffe Jean was headlining the Reggae Sun Splash event. And we had one of our drivers driving him around in the vehicle when he was here, which of course, unbeknown to us, was a stolen car. One morning, the Serious Crime Squad decided to crash my house when I was in bed. They arrived and subsequently they discovered that vehicle on the drive. They also discovered a number of different documents basically related to stolen cars, and they also discovered a small quantity of drugs. I was arrested and obviously I was back to square one again. But as luck would have it, I'd realised they'd actually released me from bail and they hadn't charged me. By the beginning of November that year, I'm back in Jamaica. I plunged myself deeply into the world of smuggling. So as much as I have passions for other things, every single time I'd done them to levels of success, smuggling would always represent itself back into my life and basically destroy whatever positive attributes I'd started. So it's 2004. I had a contact who I worked with in the underworld, and he came to me and said that he had access to a team of officers who were clearing containers. And at first, obviously, I was very sort of, that doesn't seem right. How do you get a whole team? It did seem like a bit too good to be true. And what had happened was a guy who had a former military background, special units, people who are trained in, high levels SAS, people like that, are sometimes given jobs with the police to do surveillance. This individual had actually been offered a job with what they call a ghost unit in Customs and Excise. And the job he was entitled to do was actually look out for corrupt customs officers. Rather than collecting the evidence, obviously, and taking it to his superiors, he approached them directly and said to the officers who he had information on, I've got this on you. And this is the deal. This either goes to the superior and you're going to probably end up in jail or face charges or be sacked, or if you want, I can show you how to work and you work with me. By getting access to these officers who he was investigating, he had obviously access now to us, which was an organised crime group. So he facilitated himself as the overall fixer. So what had happened is he'd charge £1 million a container. That was a flat rate, regardless of what was in the container. He'd give us specific instructions of what we'd have to do. We want X amount of money up front, which was only a small holding deposit, £100,000. And then after that, all the balance must be paid within 48 hours of receiving the container. Now, £1 million or a 1.5 million US dollars could have seemed like quite a lot of money to some people. But when you're talking about bringing in drugs, you're talking about tiny money, it's pittance. We started to organise something. We put on, I think it was like 500 kilos of cocaine on the first shipment, and bang, cleared it. Came straight through, not an issue. And it was like, it's for real, it works. Give us the container number as soon as it leaves the country of origin. So we had a code we created, which was numbers and letters, which was sort of done in reverse. And then once the container then was ready for release, we had to go in normal procedure with paperwork, and he'd then contact our guy, and our guy would say, it's ready to collect. So now we'd discovered and had access to the best thing in the world. You were given an opportunity to ship what you want in any quantity you want, clean as a whistle. And one of the team I worked with, an associate, at this point I said, listen, we stop everything and we just specifically do this. But what happened was he actually was putting himself around and offering services to a lot of other people. Now, understand in the East End of London and Essex and Kent as well, you've got a lot of groups of people who are prolific smugglers, who are also working through the market. He'd actually been working with a team and they were bringing in pineapples, but in disguise. So they'd been hollowing out the pineapples, putting cocaine in there, sealing them with wax, putting them back and basically sending them over. But the police were actually looking at this group of people. So one of my associates that work at the market, he was under surveillance because he'd been working with his team from Essex. So their mobile phones were all being tapped. They were on regular surveillance. In December 2004, a container carrying 584 kilograms of cocaine concealed in sacks as coconuts arrived at Spitalfields Market. When the container arrived with the produce in it, I called him. I said, "It's cleared. It's ready to collect." Anyway, his phone was under surveillance. Customs was thinking, hold on, how can it be cleared when these pineapples are still on the water? So they had absolutely no idea whatsoever about the coconut shipment. The officers who were investigating the pineapples, after hearing the container had been cleared, drove down to the docks. So randomly, they decided to pull the container. They opened the container and half a ton of cocaine literally fell out the back onto them all. If they were to have arrested the customs officers, suspended them, or investigated them anywhere whatsoever, which they should have done, we instantly would have had a loophole. But not only us having a loophole, every single container that had gone through there with drugs in it, and everyone that had been arrested for those drugs over years, all those people that were in prison serving time for it, would have meant every single case would have had an appeal because the evidence that they'd given in court couldn't have been trusted. They were told to turn a blind eye and send us to collect it. The following evening, we went to the market. By this time, the cocaine had been replaced with blocks of wood. All the blocks of wood now were in the container. Customs pounced, and everyone was arrested. And it was basically a cut and dry case because, for all intents and purposes, they made the biggest seizure at the time of cocaine in London. There'd never been a seizure of that size ever before. And, you know, we were carted off to prison, awaiting, obviously, trial. So it's December 2004. Myself and 6 co-defendants have all been arrested, and we're all now locked up on remand at Wandsworth Prison for being knowingly concerned in importation of 584 kilograms of cocaine. So basically, it wasn't looking good. I remember when I saw my solicitor come to visit me in the prison, I said to him, it's a bad corner. I know it's a bad corner. How's it looking? He said, as long as you've got a hole in your arse, you ain't getting out of this one. So basically, the evidence against us was 4 years of surveillance coming from the DEA, Interpol, Serious Crime Directive 7, Metro Middle Market Police and Regional Crime Squad. There virtually wasn't an intelligence source that hadn't been gathering information on us over a period of years, which had been compiled into public interest immunity. They had, in the police lockup, over 500 kilograms of pure cocaine. They had an abundance of, cash, other things they'd managed to seize from the raids, which they conducted straight after. It, put bluntly, was not looking good. So I was approached in prison by another inmate who said to me he had access to a corrupt officer that was aware of the case, and he had access to all my case documents. So the same corrupt officer was prepared for £250,000 to go into Customs House, go into the safe under a different identity and steal all the documents. I was then slipped these documents in prison. So what I realised as soon as I saw them, they were all highly sensitive intelligence service documents. I thought to myself, this could be my golden ticket. All I had to do was find a method of devising bringing these documents into the court to cause enough of a benefit of a doubt. So imagine these documents. My legal team couldn't see them. The only person who actually was allowed them was the judge and the prosecution. I managed to get them into court and literally cause bedlam. all bets were off. It caused complete madness. The judge was going ballistic, but it created enough confusion to force a retrial. There's a retrial. Of course, this won't fall for the same trick twice, so I'm searched before I go into court, but I've preempted that's going to happen and arranged a pirate radio station broadcast the contents of the documents on the station. Second retrial, all 7 of us were acquitted. So in May 2007, I'm released from custody, you know, taking a different direction in my life. My son Hayden is born, and now I'm ready to go straight and live a normal life. But as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I decided it was time to go back to the music industry. Wasn't really getting me the same kind of financial gains that drug smuggling was getting me. So I got back involved in the business. I made a lot of money in a very short period of time. That's where it all started to go wrong. Someone I knew who was a local guy to me, I lent some money to help him out of a situation. And unfortunately, he'd been under police surveillance. There was no hope of me getting my money back. I was game to get involved, so I arranged a shipment, but wanted to be no way near it. On the day of this product arriving, I was told I had to go with him to collect it. Now, I'm coming from the old school of gangsters, so I agreed I'll do it, but this is the arrangement. If police turn up or come anywhere near you, what I'll do is I'll be behind you, and then any police stopping you or trying to stop you, I'll take them out the road, and you just carry on driving, take off and get rid of the gear. But unbeknown to me, he'd been a police magnet. So he was either doing one or two things. He was either giving information deliberately to the police, but more likely, I felt he had the idea of taking drugs off of people and then not having to pay them because they were getting arrested. So all he had to do was lead the police straight to them. The most bizarre thing was when the police did put on their sirens, and I'd done what I said I was going to do and decided to take my Range Rover and force him off of the road, he just literally slows down and pulls up with 6 kilograms of cocaine in the back seat. So there I am, arrested, track record, been acquitted of 500 kilos plus 7 years earlier, and I'm centred now with driving a police car off of the road with drugs in that car. It ain't looking good. After 2 trials in 2014, I end up getting 15 years and become a category A prisoner. It took a lot for me to wake up to reality, but when I faced reality, I was at Belmarsh prison and I could see all these young guys and I saw them doing huge sentences. Their lives were wasted. And the realisation came to me, they're killing each other on the streets. And my parents were community leaders. They were people who'd done everything they could to build communities. And for all these years, I'd been destroying them. For my own self-gratification, for things which I thought were so important to have, possessions. And the realisation came to it, you know, I had blood on my hands. So my mission in life had to be, how can I do something to rectify some of the I'd done in my life and turn stuff around? And I allowed my conscience finally to become my guide. People get arrested and they say, poor me. And they start to feel sorry for themselves. But they don't give consideration for the victims. I never gave consideration for any victims. I asked myself the question, would I want any of my children to go down this road? The answer is no. But more importantly, would I want anyone else's child to go down this road? And the answer to that is no. In 2019, I was finally released from prison and started the AP Foundation. The most important thing for me was to be able to put my life down in words, to let people be able to read on it and reflect on it, not as a vanity project, but to serve as a lesson, to serve as something to understand that when it all comes to the end, when it turns the final chapter, was it all worth it? And the answer to that is no. You have to go on a journey sometimes, but the end destination sometimes or most times isn't quite what you thought it would be. So I wrote my autobiography, Empire of Dirt, to explain and understand what it is. When it comes down to it, you're just building an empire of dirt. It has no substance or real value compared to the value of people, relationships. To this day, the most common route of shipping cocaine is container ships, but it's not just limited to container ships. What the biggest one they do is the deep sea fishing tankers. So they'll bring those in, huge nets. They'll be full of gear. They'll put the sat nav thing that they use for the ship, and they'll drop them. And then what happens is they drop them on the coast, and then the smaller fishing trawlers around these areas you're talking about will go in and retrieve them. Subs have been going for a long while now, for as long as actually I can remember from the 90s. You know, go fast boats are still very much in use, you know, to do the short runs. You know, all the traditional methods. Diving ships is very common, where people put what we call a torpedo at the bottom of it, which is a large package of drugs, and then divers go in to retrieve it after it's arrived. Prices will only go down if there's a bigger supply and a bigger demand, and prices have dropped considerably. Seizures now are bigger than they used to be. So perhaps we have a very small idea of what actually is being produced or what's actually getting through to what it really, really is. So we're moving away from where half a ton was a lot of drugs. We're talking about shipments of 5-10 tons now coming through on a very regular basis and getting caught. I think what's going on at the moment with fast boats being attacked and people being shot on them, it's something obviously which is done for a scare tactic, but people have to realise this. For someone to get on a fast boat with 4 250 Yamaha engines and a massive tank of petrol on it filled with cocaine, you're pretty desperate in the first place. So the people that are getting shot here and getting killed are people at the very bottom of the ladder. They're very easily replaced. So it's not going to stop anything. Drugs could be, and I say this as a form of drugs, a scourge on society, because when you honestly look what it does to people, it destroys them. But it doesn't just kill them. It's what dies inside of them when they're alive. We should actually look and say to ourselves, maybe we should spend a bit more time and money researching it. Maybe some drugs should be legalised. Maybe some drugs should be looked at the, you know, the medicinal purposes some drugs do have. For example, marijuana, to help people with asthma and other conditions. We now know it helps in cancer in some cases and situations. Maybe we should rethink it. Everyone wants to find themselves in the marketplace, okay? You know, mainland Turkey was obviously a dominant place of heroin. We all know this. Now, the relationship obviously with cocaine being exchanged for heroin and, you know, Turkish syndicates having more influence, as in Albanian syndicates having more influence. So the dynamics changes every so often, and it will be different in another 5 years. Kids are on the street dying, you know, for washed rock, and they're putting their life on the line. And there are guys out there going to prison for selling grams. But when Middle England and the society that turns around and gives out these big sentences stop making those phone calls after dinner because they want a social gram for the dinner party, and when that stops, that's when we can start to look about stopping the problem. But it's supply and demand. Upper class people have glamorised cocaine to make it something that poor people want. And what's a real shame is the people who really are at the helm of giving out huge sentences to the people who are the kids who are probably selling drugs, you know, to put some food on the table for their mum, or to, you know, get the basic bits and pieces that they want. Not necessarily say all of them, but a lot of them, they're caught in a poverty belt, are delivering the cocaine to upper class, middle class people who are, a lot of them are in the criminal justice system as lawyers. A lot of them are accountants. A lot of them are high, you know, level jobs, making a lot of money, and it's amusement for them. But every gram of cocaine they put up their nose is blood that they are putting on the street with kids who are fighting over those deals, who are fighting over those turfs.
Hi, I'm a producer on How Crime Works. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe and comment below with more ideas of topics you'd like us to cover in this series.